Well, hello and a very warm welcome to this webinar, Introducing Credit Review, a new early warning system for corporate credit quality. My name is Keith Mullin and it's my pleasure to be moderating this session today. And I'm delighted to be joined by three speakers who are going to be taking you through a presentation in a few moments. So let's move to the next slide so you can actually see them in more detail. So very happy to have on the call Michael Boller, Executive Director, Head of Subscription Business at Scope Group, Evelina Stenoeva, Executive Director at Scope Ratings, and Torsten Troch, Head of Business Development, Business Information Services at COFAS. And very happy that this session today is being jointly presented by Scope Group and COFAS to take you through our credit review products. Let's move to the next slide. I'll take you through quickly how the session is going to unfold. So as I said, in a few moments, I'll hand over to Michael, who's going to kick us off with the presentation. And we'll be addressing, I guess, four different points here. So common issues with credit scoring systems and portfolio monitoring. Is data, such as payment behavior, useful to develop predictive credit assessments? How will credit review support in monitoring and providing early warning messages? And then we've got a case study for you comparing credit quality trends across sectors for European SMEs. And when the presentation's over, we'll take some Q&A. And also interspersed in the presentation, we have two poll questions. We do like a bit of audience participation. So there'll be two questions that I'll introduce and read out the answers. And I'm going to ask you to actually vote for the answer that most approximates to what you think. So I think that's it from me. Michael, Torsten, Evelina, great to see you. Thanks for being here today. And let me hand over to you, Michael, to kick us off.
Thank you, Keith, and happy to be here. And thank you for everybody participating. So let's get started with the first agenda item by going to the next slide. We will first be talking about the common issues with credit scoring systems and portfolio monitoring. What is probably worthwhile mentioning is that Scope and COFAS have struck a business relationship to start offering this credit review product to the market. And before we did so, we did some market analysis. And in terms of what market participants generally found to be the key issues when it came to existing credit scoring systems and portfolio monitoring. So we look at the next slide. We see that there were a few different aspects, key requirements that we heard when we were speaking to the market. And they were on these four areas of coverage, efficiency, validity, and reactiveness. And what people found was that when you're trying to get credit assessments or use scoring tools to get an understanding of your portfolio, coverage was a very important point in the sense that with some of the tools, it would only be available for certain companies. And this could be because it was restricted by size. You only have even large companies, even a Scope within the group. Of course, we have Scope ratings. And we generally rate larger companies. They're not available on SMEs as of yet. Or it could be because you have scoring tools that are only available on listed companies and not on non-listed companies, because it uses some algorithm that relies on market information, whether that be equity prices or CDS spreads or the likes. Could also be because the assessments and the scoring tool is only applicable to certain geographies. So you could only do Western European companies and not Asian companies, or only North American companies, not South American companies. So coverage to get a complete picture across your portfolio was a point that many found very important. Another important aspect people looked at was like, well, it needs to be efficient, because with people have to manually input data to derive a credit assessment on a company. You may do that for a company, but if you're going to do that for an entire portfolio of companies, and then also keep on updating that over time, for the monitoring purposes of the credit assessments on those companies in the portfolio, that could become quite cumbersome. So people were looking for an efficient solution whereby all of those things were already connected. Validity became also an important and interesting point. What a lot of users ultimately want to think is like, okay, well, can I trust these credit assessments that I'm receiving here? And generally, there are two approaches in the market. I mean, you see organizations that develop credit assessments and credit tools that are driven from an academic perspective, but they're not necessarily relying on those themselves. And in the other perspective would be a business-driven one, whereby the organization is actually also relying on these credit assessments themselves. And what is actually interesting, also sort of like giving you an early insight with credit review, is that in this case, Coface is relying on these credit assessments themselves in their own business, which is in the tune then of about, their credit exposures range in the tune of 540 billion euros. So there's certainly a little play on words here, that there's skin in the assessment, that they have skin in the game in terms of making sure that they will do everything in their power that these credit assessments are valid. Another important characteristic which became very interesting was reactiveness. And it was very topical as we are going through the COVID crisis, where if you would be looking at assessments that, there are different schools of thought. It's around your philosophy and the risk horizon that you're using. So you could either have assessments that are very volatile because they leverage, as I mentioned, for example, of this market-based information. And also there, they could be limited then by the scope in terms of the coverage. You can also have a debate on whether those are then, really capture credit risk purely, or that there's also market sentiment involved in those credit assessments then. And on the other end of the spectrum, you could have credit assessments that are too slow to react. And that was really what people were looking at. Is like, well, I have these models or I have these assessments that are based purely and only off financial statements. And then due to the COVID crisis, it was like, well, can I still rely on the financial statements from last year to get a good picture of what the credit worthiness of the company is today? And so it was clear that people were looking for credit assessments that also leverage off as much data as possible, including, for example, payment behavior data, to then inform themselves of what the credit assessment is of that company. So those were sort of the main market requirements that we found out as we started speaking to different market participants. And and maybe we can actually move on from here. And I think, Keith, if I'm not mistaken, we're going into our first poll question.
We do indeed. Let's have a first poll question. And the question is this: what are the biggest difficulties you face using automated credit assessments or scoring tools? And please select one of the following: insufficient corporate coverage, data input and portfolio monitoring are cumbersome, risk drivers are unclear or inconsistent, or assessments are updated too slowly. So if you could ponder those for just a quick few seconds and provide an answer, and then we'll give you maybe 20-30 seconds, and you can then we'll show the results. So Michael, while we're waiting for the results, any predictions, or Torsten or Evelina, anyone want to throw in a quick prediction?
Well, it will be very interesting to see what this group will say. All of these 4 points came up in early discussions, it will. I think any of them. I don't think there's a wrong answer as such.
No.
So let's see what they were answering. That is very interesting to see. So I think if just looking at the results, the insufficient corporate coverage, it is really interesting. I'm actually, of course, interesting looking at the highest result, which is this 50% insufficient corporate coverage. So coverage is clearly an important point, that you can get your credit assessment on everything in your portfolio. Some do also seem to think that indeed risk drivers are unclear or inconsistent. People can manage around the data input and portfolio monitoring. That I'm surprised, I have to say, about the fact that the assessments are updated too slowly. Because that was one that many argued on when, due to the fact that they found that the credit assessments were stale.
Interesting. Okay, well, perhaps we can come back to that perhaps towards the end and discuss that. But in the interest of time, let's move on then with the presentation and with the next slide. And I think we're moving now to Torsten. You're going to take over from this point. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. Thanks for having me today, and thanks to the audience. Let me just repeat the question. Is data such as payment behavior useful to develop predictive credit assessments? Definitely yes. Let me quote our senior manager, actuarial Dr. Nikolai Kolesnikov. Payment behavior and historical payment incidents is very significant information source to be applied for credit score models development. This valuable information that is normally not correlated with other information characteristics can significantly increase discrimination power of the full scoring model. So far, so good. Let's take one more step back and take a look at the business information industry. Classic credit agencies usually compile credit reports primarily from public sources. Every experienced user of business reports knows the shortcomings of classic credit agencies when it comes to the timeliness of balance sheets and register information. This is where COFAS is starting and driving the evolution from business report to credit assessment. Let's have a look at the global unique data sources that COFAS uses to build credit assessment, aka credit review, on the next slide. COFAS global data sources are composed from unique insights, from macro consistency, local perspectives, and international networking. Where most of the classic credit agencies leave off, shown as the 5 bricks below in the pyramid, we start with our assessment. The two most important sources to build credit assessment are COFAS global claims and global payment performance experiences. If there is a payment disruption, we are the first one to know. For those who are not familiar with trade credit insurance, COFAS is notified of non-performing receivables due to the mandatory component of trade credit insurance contract. Means no notification, no insurance benefit. Important to mention at this point, as one of the leading trade credit insurance company with 50,000 clients, we manage an exposure of 540 billion euro with credit assessment, and we cover risks in 200 countries. We are our most critical customer because we use our assessment to manage the risk in our global portfolio. Another important aspect, country or underwriter assessments. Over 600 COFAS underwriter in our departments all over the world make thousands of decisions every day on which we take risks. At this point, it should be noted, credit bureaus usually don't take any risk. Through its customer relations, COFAS also obtains access to documents that are not intended for the public. For example, if a company lays claim to exemption from disclosing the annual financial statements. We go on with country risk assessments. COFAS produces country risk assessments for 162 countries based on business climate, payment experience, macroeconomic, political, banking, and environment analysis, including in 15 subscores. This assessment is updated regularly and gives an estimate of the average risk of a company in a country faces. This unique indicator provides insights into a country's potential influence in companies' business volatility and their financial commitments. Sector risk assessments. 13 major sectors are assessed worldwide. COFAS sector assessments are based on 70 years of COFAS expertise and on the financial data published by listed companies from 6 geographical sectors. 5 financial indicators are taken into account: turnover, profitability, net debt ratio, cash flow, and claims observed by our risk managers. There are much more aspects that help to build our credit assessments. Global data collection, we are searching for the best data for our risk management teams on the local markets, localized risk action plans that are built with our customers, global group analysis done by our underwriter management teams, company with site visits, and in-depth interviews with our global underwriter and account management teams, and a few more. But once again, we would like to highlight our payment behavior data set with the next slide. And just to make sure where our payment behavior data is coming from, it's coming from at least 4 business lines. Coface is well known for trade credit insurance. Michael Boller already mentioned it. We are having a 540 billion euro exposure. Debt collection. We are just a few people know it. We are the worldwide biggest partner network in B2B collection, and you see a 1.4 billion euro receivables as a data set for our payment data analysis, which is growing day by day. And we are very successful in the factoring business and are retrieving a lot of data from this area of the business or from supply chain finance. And once again, Coface is notified of non-performing receivables. On the next slide, it's a little bit of Coface at a glance, or the summary of unique data and the skin in the assessment. Coface is a leading credit insurer from the top 4 global insurance companies, and long-standing experience since 75 years, a global leader for trade with 50,000 clients in 100 countries, risk coverage in 200 countries, and business information in 200 countries. And we have 45 enhanced information centers who are collecting, as I mentioned on the slide before, collecting the best data in the market for our risk team to be prepared for any underwriter situation. We got 66 underwriting departments and 600 analysts and underwriters who are doing their business on a day-by-day decision action within over 100 country presences. And one thing was mentioned, the coverage of the data, or insufficient corporate coverage. We are providing credit assessment within 195 countries. And credit assessment is produced for every registered company. So it's a full coverage, we got to say. The idea of the next slide is to show you the history and development of a credit review assessment to give you an impression what's going on behind the scenes. It's a credit review score history. This company was being closely monitored through meetings with the CFO and frequent phone contact, and over and above the information the company was releasing to the stock market regulator. At the end of 2015, the company had a credit review score of 5, which is medium risk. In February 2016, the credit review score was cut to 4, increased risk, owing to adverse developments in Spain, which were IT problems and poor consumer data. In October 2017, the credit review score was cut to 3, high risk, as the group battled losses and weak performances in certain markets, especially Spain. Even though the company's debt had been refinanced, debt levels were still high against EBITDA. In April 2018, credit review score was lowered again to 2, very high risk, due to continuing high levels of debt, while the trends in the business were not improving. Payment delays had also been registered, and there was uncertainty about when sales of non-core assets could be achieved to reduce the debt. In summary, some bullet points to put it all together. Coface works close to the risk with the skin in this assessment. Coface provides underwriter expertise instead of register information reports. Coface uses credit review, credit assessment to manage our own risk. We use what we give to our partner, and credit review allows you to monitor your portfolio with the eye of a global credit insurer. And this is, Michael, what you will explain further on, I guess. So thank you.
Thank you, Torsten. And we're going to give you now our second poll question. Let's move to the next slide. Perhaps let's go straight into the question, which is this: what would improve the monitoring of companies' creditworthiness in your portfolios? Now, is it around macro data, fundamental data, payment behavior data, or analyst opinions, or different analytical perspectives? If you could give that a few seconds thought and perhaps give us your answer, we will go to the answers. But Torsten, I'm imagining that you'd like to see payment behavior data as one of the critical answers there, right?
Yeah, of course. Indeed, you're right. But I was wrong with the first poll question, so maybe here's another surprise.
Okay, just another few seconds, and we'll bring up the answers in 5 seconds.
Yeah, I think, Keith, there is no wrong answer here, really.
No, indeed.
Probably everybody would want more of everything. Well, that is
absolutely
interesting. People apparently don't value the macro data as much. Torsten, was this more in line with what you were expecting?
I hope so, but the first one was a surprise, so good to see this, yeah.
Good. I like the contrast, actually, between the fact that, people do clearly value then the payment behavior data, but we're maybe, not thinking about that within how that could actually improve the timeliness and the reactiveness of these assessments, what we looked at previously. Because clearly by using this payment behavior data, you can get the reactiveness of your assessment to improve much quicker. So I think it's actually quite an interesting change.
Indeed, absolutely.
Okay, well, all right. I think it's me up next again.
You're absolutely right. Let's move on to the next slide, and then it's over to Michael.
Super. Thank you very much, Keith. And so, you sort of have a little bit of background now about some of the things and how COFAS works in the data that it uses. And then we did this market analysis around what were some of the problems that people were facing with different credit scoring tools and credit assessments out there. And that's sort of what we used then to develop our credit review product. And so if we go to the next slide, really what we are doing and positioning credit review as the primary early warning system for corporate credit quality. And why do we position it like that? And it was actually quite interesting that if you think about an early warning system, I imagine that most of you on the line will know what an early warning system is or what's meant with it. But if you actually Google it, you won't find a common definition for an early warning system. One that I did find was really inspirational was the one by the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, which said, if you're looking at an early warning system, it should have these 4 components. So you should have risk knowledge, so that data should be systematically collected, analyzed, and risk assessments performed, which is essentially what we're doing. You should have a monitoring and warning system service. So the system should be in place to continue to monitor hazards and then provide those early warning services. There should be dissemination and communication. So the risk information and the early warning message must, of course, be delivered to those that need to be informed. And then there's a response capability. So systems should be in place to respond to the event that is then registered. So what we're then able to do with credit review, if we skip to the next slide, is that we're really aiming to keep risk managers and investors informed about companies' credit quality by providing validated credit assessments and probabilities of default on every registered company. And in talking about coverage, which was clearly one of the most important points, what we saw from the first poll. When I say every registered company, I mean every registered company. So large, medium, small, tiny, as long as the company is registered in its local register somewhere, then an assessment can be produced on it. And all of the information that also Thorsten spoke about is then used to come up with that credit assessment. And so that includes that very interesting payment behavior data. When it comes to the monitoring and warning service, what we're then doing is we are allowing for the portfolio monitoring to happen on our Scope 1 platform. And also the assessments are available via an API. So clients can set up as many portfolios as they want. They can set up a portfolio by country, by sector, by team member, by whatever your preference is. And then all of the companies, by fund is a very common use case as well, by the way. And then you can keep all of those entities in the fund, all those companies, the assessment will continue to be monitored. And that is essentially intraday. So we continue to just work with all of the data systems and database that we have, that whenever there's a change to an assessment, essentially it will show pretty instantaneously thereafter in your portfolio. But then you, of course, want to be notified about that. So from a dissemination and communication perspective, we're making sure that you get alerted to the fact, like, hey, there is something going on within your portfolio. And that then allows you, of course, to do a response. And from a response capability perspective, it's been really interesting also to speaking to different market participants about it, is that in many ways, the first response should come from yourself. Because as soon as you know, like if you would see an assessment deteriorating and quite significantly, you probably want to know, like, hey, what's going on with this company? And you may want to reach out to the company or take action or divest or whatever your options might be. And or at least start a conversation with the company if you can. So that response capability in many ways comes from then the client that is alerted to that change. We've tried to think around, like, okay, what other how can we further support these response capabilities? And we've come up with different ways to do that via even something like a telephone service to really get into the nitty gritty to understand why did it change? And of course, also through the Scope 1 marketplace, which some of you might be already familiar with and using, you're able to also see all of scope ratings research, other analysis, whether that be on industries and different things, or take an ESG perspective on that same company to help you with deepening your insights around it. So that's really how we came to position credit review as such. If we look at the next slide, you'll actually see a little snapshot of what the output could look like. So these credit review assessments are then available via the Scope 1 marketplace. And it's important to remember that, of course, even COFAS uses these same credit assessments to manage their credit exposures. But it is expressed from a scale from 10 to 0, where 10 would be best and 0 would be insolvent. And it has the associated probability of default with it as well. When you've done your assessment, also over time, it will continue to track how your assessment has been performing on that company. You see a little pyramid on the screen as well that we use to also differentiate between the different types of assessments and scores and ratings that are available at Scope and via Scope 1. what we want to mainly differentiate is that if you look at that level 5, level 4, which are the actual credit ratings by scope ratings, the assessment level and the review level are those that are not regulated credit ratings, but are assessments of different kinds, where the review is really where it is very broad, available in many companies, highly quantitative. Assessment follows a different approach whereby it would be more qualitative. And of course, a rating is a very intensive qualitative process as well. So that allows us to differentiate it. With the credit review product, people can also get the country risk assessment, which is here shown as an A1. That is something that is available then for also one of those building blocks that Torsten alluded to, and particularly useful when you're looking at international portfolios and try to understand what the country risk there is. So that gives you an impression of what we provide there. If we move to the next slide, you get a better sense also of this product being available on the Scope 1 marketplace. So what people are able to do is that when you're looking for a company, you can look it up, and really all you need to identify the company is either its name and its country where it is located to find it, because all the other data is already pooled automatically by us. Other ways to identify it would be through the company's registration number, or for example, its tax ID, its VAT ID, which are all unique identifiers to identify the companies. And then when you're looking for the company, you can request the credit assessment on it, see the probability of default and the country risk assessment, and then create portfolios around it so that you can continue to keep track of that company and continue to monitoring around it. And it will be updated, and you will get little activity notices such as, hey, a red dot, hey, this has now been downgraded. And we look at a 2-week period where we keep this people informed, like, hey, it's been downgraded over the last 2 weeks, or hey, it's been upgraded over the last 2 weeks, for example. And on that same marketplace, you can also get different products to get different perspectives on those same companies. So that's in a nutshell what we are able to do then now with credit review. Okay. And now I'll hand over to Evelina, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a select study for, so let's move to the next slide. So Evelina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Keith. So what we have done as a case study, we took all the scores available in the COFAS database for European SMEs, and we wanted to see what would be the impact on the 2020 assessments. So if we can go to the first slide to see our findings on the next one. And actually what I wanted to say is that the first answer to the post question actually doesn't surprise me that much, because when you think about it, payment behavior is something that is very wishful to have, but actually I assume many people struggle even with fundamental data, because especially when we are talking about smaller companies, their financials are not readily available, and therefore the coverage can be really limited. So one of the benefits of the product and the system that we have in place is actually that we are gathering everything possible, including the payment behavior data, because it kind of nicely layers on top and refines the assessment. And this will be seen when we compare the findings that we did for the 2020 full year compared to the Q1 2021. But let me explain first what we did. We gathered the information from the credit review scores for 13 different sectors in 5 major European countries. And we looked for those sectors because one might assume that the COVID-19 impact was significant for all countries and all sectors. I guess nobody would argue with that. But we wanted to see, okay, is there some difference and what are those differences? So what we could see is at the bottom of the table, we computed the average per country and we are looking at the downgrades. So overall, there was a big tendency of downgrades. That means a kind of deterioration of the scores, which is something as a trend one might expect. And on average, for the 5 countries, we could see that it seems that in Germany, those were the minimum, and while the UK was mostly impacted on average. We also compared the minimum and maximum impact for all those countries, and also the disparity amongst the different sectors. And interestingly enough, it seems that in Germany, the disparity was the biggest, i.e. the sector that is minimally impacted compared to the ones is mostly impacted was the biggest. This is measured by the standard deviation of 5.2%. And in the UK, this disparity was the smallest, and we can see that most of the sectors were evenly impacted based on the data presented in the database. And when we did the same exercise in Q1 2021, that is the results on the following slide. Yeah, thank you. So here we can see that there is still tendency for downgrades. However, the impact is smaller. So on the previous slide, we were having impacts predominantly in double digits, while here the digits are single ones. And we could also see that there are some differences. So for example, when we compare the average impact per country for all sectors, we could see that compared to 2020, now the country that is with least impacts is Spain, which is 4.4% on average. And the highest impacted country was France, 9.1% compared previously to the UK. So that already gives you a kind of an indication, because one can imagine that for smaller companies, they rarely issue Q1 reports. So most likely these differences that can be envisaged could be linked to potentially available data on payment behavior. Of course, we should not forget that all countries implemented different measures as a support for the companies, but I would like to link more to the availability of payment data. It is also, when we look at the sectors, the ones that are minimally impacted from 2020 and 2021, in Italy, the sectors are totally different. So previously, predominantly the non-specialized trade industry and the mechanics and precision sectors were predominantly impacted, while here we see that the minimum impact was on the textile and business services, business and personal services was mostly impacted. Maybe it is also interesting to see that in some countries, the sectors that were impacted remained the same. This is valid for Germany and Spain. Both in 2020 and 2021, the sectors in Germany that were impacted as minimum was construction. The same remained in the first quarter of 2021. While the highest impacted sector was mechanics and precision, and again, the same remained. In Spain, we have similar tendency of preserving the sectors. So the highest impacted sector in both data samples was the metals one. There are some differences in the higher impact for the France and the UK. And we can see that in France, in 2021, the electronic equipment was the sector with highest downgrades, while previously in 2020, it was the mechanics and precision. And in the UK, in the 2021 first quarter, metals was highly impacted, while in 2020 still it was mineral products and the chemicals. Interestingly enough, in both countries, France and the UK, the utility seems to be the least impacted, which could refer to the fact that people, they do use the utilities, and possibly, you know, companies, they pay also their bills, and not only companies. So that was in a nutshell. But what we try to demonstrate that actually using the data review as a monetary function could bring you some indications what are the trends in a country or a given sector. And of course, you can follow that for a company as well. It will be interesting to see what would be the outcomes when we reach the end of 21 and how they would compare to 2020. Okay. Keith, over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Evelina. So let's move to the next slide now, and we're going to take some questions. So that concludes the formal presentation part of the session. So please feel free to type questions in if you have any. Michael, let me go straight to you with a question. You kind of covered this, but perhaps you can reiterate. What if people wanted to better understand the reason for changes in the credit scores? How do they get that disseminated?
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, it's an interesting one. What I tried to allude to in terms of that response capability and what else we're doing to create that additional transparency and to help people deciding what kind of a response to take. The assessment is essentially that. It is the assessment. If you want to understand, like, hey, but why did it change? What we came up with is there is no digital way to show that as of yet. You know, we looked into this. So we couldn't say like, oh, it is because the financial data changed. Oh, it is because the payment behavior. Oh, it is because of some macro change. Or we couldn't identify the underlying reason in a digital way and make that available to everybody. So what we, of course, the information is there. So what we came up with is a and I know this sounds a bit old school, but it's quite useful, is a telephone service so that people can call us, and we'll arrange a call also with the people looking into the algorithms on COFA's side to explain why a assessment changed. And so that can give you then that additional insight to sort of decide what kind of a response. And that's what we sort of came up with in that respect.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely. Torsten, there's a question here that is perfect for you, which is this: does COFAS cover companies which are privately owned and not listed?
Yes, I guess we could describe credit review instead of a refreshed report or something as something that is produced for every request. This is what Michael Boller already was describing, that we're not going to the register and to get the data from it. We are opening all our other data sources, means payment behavior data, to create a credit review. And this is why we can assure this, so to say.
Yeah, if I can also comment. I mean, I also touched on this in this risk knowledge thing, and I think it's really a unique thing. And what people really appreciated when we were doing the initial outreach and speaking with different organizations about this, Keith, was that, you know, it is literally available on every registered company. And I mean, when I mean registered, I don't mean listed. I mean, registered is like registered in Companies House in the UK, for example. You know, it includes all the listed companies as well as all the non-listed companies, literally. And I think it's a very strong aspect that on every company, as long as you can identify it by its name or because you have its company's registration number or you have its tax ID, you can get a credit review assessment on it.
Yeah, that's incredible. And Torsten, look, we've talked a lot about payment behavior in the session today, and I think it's very clear that it's a critical data set. But can you why is it specifically, why is that so important? Are there metrics that kind of really help you to define the importance of payment behavior data?
I guess it's a mean of choice to reflect current economic developments, and this is related to or this explains that 25% of insolvencies are due to unpaid invoices, and this describes everything, I guess. And if I'm looking, I referred a lot to the business today. But it's very important to understand that there are payment data pools, but that we are referring to receivables from all over the world, and again to the rules that are belonging to a trade credit insurance contract, and so there is no better and accurate way of defining this current development.
Yeah, no, indeed. And Michael, you talked a bit about the various components of the credit review tool. If I had to push you to choose the most vital function of credit review, what would you say?
Well, Keith, I think everybody can do credit assessments, but if I look at some of our existing licensees, it's probably around two things. On the one hand, people really like to have the risk knowledge so that they can get a credit assessment on any company, and they use that as part of their investment decisioning processes. And then, of course, very much from a monitoring perspective. So the common point that we often get is, look, I wish I had the ability to react faster, right? Had I only known, then I could have taken action, right? And then I could have gotten ahead of the curve and remediated certain issues. And that is essentially what we're able to do. And so I think that this early warning system, and then the fact that we provide these notifications when there is a change, and we have this ongoing monitoring, I think that is really the second aspect to it, which I would rank. I would struggle to rank them between those two aspects, Keith.
Yeah.
I would probably leave it at that.
Okay. Good. Thanks for that. So at the moment, there are no more questions other than those. So if you have any more questions in the audience, please feel free. If not, we'll close in a minute. While you're thinking about potentially asking a question, let me then thank Evelina, Michael, and Torsten for your comments today. Let's move to the next slide, actually, before we do close. And then if you did want to know more about credit review, or indeed have a free trial, there's a link there where you can get access, or contact any of us, and we'll be happy to help you. But scope-1.com/credit-review, and we'll take it from there. So Michael, Torsten, Evelina, looks like there are no more questions. So I guess let me close the session. And thank you very much. There's our contacts in case you needed them. We'll be back soon. And before I do close, we will actually be producing various research outputs from the credit review product on a hopefully timely basis, either country or sector based. So this is one of the plans that we have. So look out for those as well. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Hope you found that useful, and goodbye from us.